I love my wife. So while on a business trip, the kids and I planned a surprise. We flew out. I'll tell you something about love. The kind that doesn't waver, even when life is crumbling around you and everything seems out of your control. It's the love that survives sleepless nights, burnt dinners, and those moments when your partner feels distant, and yet you still choose them every single day. That's the kind of love I had for Lisa. The kind of love that never questioned whether we'd make it, even when our pockets were empty and we had nothing but each other. The kind of love that stood strong as we built a life together, had children, laughed over inside jokes, and found joy in the most mundane of things. It wasn't always easy, but I didn't mind. I loved her when she was exhausted after a long day at work, when stress lines showed on her face, and when she came home so tired she barely had the energy to speak. But I didn't need words to know that she was mine and I was hers. For me, that was what love was. Choosing someone over and over again, no matter what, even when they pulled away, even when the world seemed to be pulling you in different directions. That's why when Lisa told me she had a last-minute conference in Chicago, I didn't give it a second thought. 3 days, she said. A quick trip for work. I kissed her goodbye, told her to be safe, and watched her pack lightly, with no more than a few things she could carry in a small bag. She promised the kids she'd bring them souvenirs, kissed me on the cheek, and left. It was supposed to be just another one of those business trips that she had so often, one that didn't seem to change anything in the grand scheme of things. The first night, she didn't call. I didn't think much of it. The second night, she sent a quick text saying she was super busy but would talk tomorrow. Again, nothing unusual. But by the third night, something felt off. I called her, but it went straight to voicemail. I called again. Same thing. A cold wave of confusion washed over me as I stared at my phone, trying to make sense of the situation. Lisa wasn't the type to ignore us, to be so distant. She always made time for us, no matter how crazy her schedule was. It was in that moment, as I sat on the couch, looking at my phone and running through every possible explanation in my head, that the idea hit me. The kind of idea that creeps into your mind like a splinter you can't shake. Maybe she's just caught up at work, I thought. But no, something told me it was more than that. Emily, our daughter, came to sit beside me, curling up next to me as she always did when she needed comfort. And in that innocent, almost too pure way, she said, "Daddy, we should go see Mommy." It was like a light bulb went off in my head. Yes, that's exactly what we should do. I didn't know why I hadn't thought of it before. It was the perfect solution, the perfect surprise. I could show Lisa just how much she meant to me. To all of us, I could remind her, in the most unexpected way, that no matter how busy life got, we were always there for her. I looked at the kids, their eyes wide with excitement, and made a decision. We were going to Chicago. It was going to be the most beautiful surprise. I didn't text Lisa. I wanted the surprise to be real, raw, unplanned. I wanted her to walk into the hotel lobby and see us standing there, waiting for her. I imagined her face lighting up when she saw the kids and me. Maybe she'd even cry. A happy tear. I wasn't sure, but the thought of it made my heart swell. I didn't want to ruin the magic of the moment. The kids were already half asleep by the time we landed late that night, their little heads leaning against my shoulders as we made our way to the cab. They had no idea what was coming, but I could see the excitement in their eyes. We took a cab to the hotel, a sleek, high-rise building in the heart of downtown Chicago. The city was buzzing, full of life, neon lights flickering, cars rushing by. It was the perfect backdrop for the surprise. But as we walked into the lobby, I could feel my nerves kick in. I told the receptionist that we were here to see Lisa Carter, expecting the usual response. A smile, a nod, and the key to her room. But instead, the receptionist's face froze. She looked at me with a strange expression, one that made my stomach drop. She typed something into her computer, glanced up, and said, "I'm sorry, sir, we don't have anyone by that name." I felt a knot form in my stomach. That wasn't possible. Lisa had said she was staying here for work. I pulled out my phone, checked the texts she'd sent. She had never mentioned the name of the hotel, just that she'd be in Chicago. I could feel the air in the lobby grow colder, sharper. I wanted to ask more questions, to demand answers, but I stopped myself. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. "Maybe there's been a mix-up," I said, trying to sound calm. She could be at a different hotel, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. I called Lisa again. Voicemail. I called again. Same thing. This time, I could feel the panic beginning to set in. I looked at the kids, still half asleep, not understanding why we hadn't found Mommy yet. "Let's go find Mommy," Emily whispered, rubbing her eyes. The words were simple, innocent, but they hit me hard. They were waiting for her. And here I was, standing in a hotel lobby, facing an impossible situation. I told the cab driver to take us to another hotel. I didn't know what I was hoping to find, but I knew I had to keep going. The kids were growing more and more restless in the back seat, their excitement turning into confusion. As we arrived at the second hotel, I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. I didn't want to let the kids down. I didn't want to be the one to disappoint them. I walked into the lobby of the second hotel, tried the same approach. "I'm looking for Lisa Carter. She should be checked in here for work." The receptionist barely looked up as she typed into the computer. After a brief pause, she said, "Yes, she is. She's in room 23 My heart skipped a beat. I didn't even ask for the room number. I had called earlier, pretending to be her assistant, to get it. It was a tactic I had used before, one I thought would help me surprise her. But now, it only added to my growing unease. I asked the receptionist to call up to the room, to let Lisa know we were here. She dialed the phone, and we stood in silence as the phone rang once. Twice. No answer. She looked at me with a raised eyebrow and said, "Would you like to leave a message?" I shook my head. "No, thank you." I turned to leave, but something inside me told me I couldn't stop here. I couldn't just go back to the hotel and pretend everything was okay. I had to know what was going on. I couldn't keep going in circles, not when I had already come this far. As I stepped back into the cab, my mind raced. Where was she? Why wasn't she answering? Why wasn't she here with us? Something wasn't right. And the longer we searched, the more I knew I was getting closer to the truth. As we drove through the bustling streets of Chicago, the city's lights flickered by, casting shadows in the corners of my mind. My thoughts spun in circles, each possibility more unsettling than the last. Could Lisa be at another hotel? Was she just caught up with work, too busy to answer? Or was there something else happening that I wasn't seeing? The questions haunted me, gnawing at my insides with every mile we covered. I glanced at the kids, their faces half lit by the glow of passing streetlights. Emily, still rubbing her eyes, had a soft look of concern in her expression, as if she sensed something was off. Noah, on the other hand, was sound asleep, his head tilted against the window, unaware of the storm that was brewing around him. I wished I could say the same. I wished I could turn a blind eye to everything. But that wasn't an option. Not now. We pulled up to another hotel, another sleek high-rise. But this time, I was starting to feel the weight of the search. I knew I had to press on. I had to know the truth, even if it shattered everything I thought I knew about my wife, my life, and my family. I couldn't go back to the kids with more unanswered questions. I needed answers. Stepping out of the cab, I didn't even think twice as I walked straight to the front desk. "I'm looking for Lisa Carter. She should be checked in here." I kept my voice steady, though my heart was racing in my chest, drumming louder with each passing second. The receptionist didn't hesitate, barely lifting her eyes as she typed on her computer. "Yes, she is. Room 238. I swallowed hard. "The same room number." I had to know what was going on. I couldn't let it go. I asked her to call up to Lisa's room. I had to hear her voice, had to make sure she wasn't in some strange situation. The receptionist machine made the call, and I stood there in silence, every nerve in my body on high alert. When the phone rang 3 times without an answer, a strange feeling curled in my stomach. The receptionist looked up at me, her face expressionless, as if she could sense my anxiety. "She's not picking up. Would you like to leave a message?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, thank you," I muttered, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. There was no more pretending. I couldn't pretend everything was fine. I couldn't even pretend I wasn't scared. The fear started to gnaw at me, the fear of what I might find. What I was about to discover was becoming unbearable. I turned and left the lobby, stepping out into the cold night air, the weight of the situation bearing down on me. The kids were still back in the cab, but I didn't want to go back to them without answers. I couldn't. I had to keep going, no matter what I found. I couldn't stop now, not when I had already come this far. I dialed her number again, straight to voicemail. This time, it didn't even surprise me. I was too numb to feel anything but the cold realization that something was wrong. Very wrong. The city around me seemed to blur into the background as I stood there in the street, my heart heavy with the knowledge that something was about to break. Something was going to change forever. I thought back to everything I had seen in the past few days. The lack of communication, the strange selfies, the odd feeling that had settled in my chest. It was all adding up. I could feel it deep in my bones that the answer were just within reach. And then, in that moment, it clicked. I needed to see her. I needed to see it for myself, to understand what had been happening behind my back. Without another thought, I hailed a cab and told the driver to take me back to the hotel. I wasn't going to leave until I had answers. When we arrived, I didn't hesitate. I had already made up my mind. I couldn't wait anymore. I couldn't keep walking around in this haze of doubt. I walked straight up to the desk, my heart pounding as I asked for Lisa's room number again. This time, the receptionist didn't need to look it up. "Room 233, she said with the books, with a neutral tone, barely glancing at me. I took the elevator up, my hands shaking as I pressed the button for the highest floor. The doors closed behind me, and the ride up seemed to stretch forever, each floor taking longer than the last. My mind was racing. Was she still in there with him? Was she alone? What if I was wrong? What if there was an innocent explanation for all this? But the more I thought about it, the less I believed in that possibility. The elevator finally dinged, and the doors slid open to a dimly lit hallway. I stood there for a moment, taking in the sleek, quiet atmosphere, the hum of the air conditioning in the background. I could feel the weight of the moment. This was it. I was standing on the edge, about to confront the truth, and I wasn't sure I was ready for it. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps echoing against the wooden floors. I stopped in front of room 2310, the number etched in my mind like a warning. I raised my hand and knocked 3 times. Hard. I heard movement inside. Then a pause. Lisa's voice, muffled but unmistakable, came through the door. "Who is it?" I could barely breathe. I swallowed, trying to force my voice to stay steady. But it cracked. "Open the door." "Lisa." There was silence, longer than before, followed by the unmistakable sound of a man's voice. "David," he called softly. The breath caught in my throat. My heart stuttered. David. I knew that name. David Sinclair. Her boss, the same man she had always described as annoying, too much of a flirt, someone she couldn't stand. Yet here he was, standing behind her door. The sound of movement inside the room grew frantic, like they were scrambling to hide something. But it was too late. I could already feel the knot in my stomach tighten. I knocked again, louder this time, and my voice cut through the silence. Lisa, open the door. There was a pause. And then, in a whisper, a voice, not hers, but his. David, Lisa. That was it. The moment I'd been dreading for so long. The door creaked open, just a sliver, just enough for me to see her, her wide eyes, the flush on her cheeks, her hair messy, and the unmistakable signs of panic in her face. She was standing there in a hotel robe, her appearance disheveled. I didn't need her to say anything. I didn't need to hear her explanation. I knew what was happening in that room, and it wasn't anything I could have ever imagined. David Sinclair was standing behind her, shirt half buttoned, his expression guilty, frozen in place. He looked like a deer caught in headlights, unable to move, unable to speak. And for the first time in my life, I understood what it felt like to see everything you believed in come crashing down around you. The room smelled of expensive cologne and cheap betrayal. Lisa grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin as she tried to stop me from entering. Jason, I can explain, she pleaded. I turned slowly, my voice barely a whisper. Explain. What is there to explain? Lisa. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She tried again, but it was futile. David, that smug bastard, stepped forward, his hands raised, as if trying to defuse the situation. Look, man, I think we should just... I didn't let him finish. I spun around so fast that he staggered back. Shut up. David. Lisa's grip on my arm tightened as she begged. Jason, please, let's just talk. I yanked my arm away from her and stepped back, shaking my head. I couldn't believe it. I had spent years loving her, trusting her, defending her. And now here she was, standing in front of me in a hotel room with another man. I had nothing left to say. I took one last look at her, and then I walked out. The hallway was eerily silent as I walked away, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't look back. I didn't have to. I knew everything I needed to know. The elevator ride down felt like the longest of my life. I could feel the weight of the betrayal in my chest. But more than anything, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I had to move forward. The life I had built with Lisa was gone. And no matter how much I loved her, no matter how much I had fought for us, there was no going back now. I was done. The doors closed behind me, and I stepped into the lobby, my mind already racing toward what came next. I walked out of the hotel lobby and into the crisp Chicago night, my mind reeling, still trying to process what I had just witnessed. The wind cut through the city streets, sharp and unforgiving, mirroring the cold that had settled deep in my bones. The lights of the city flickered in the distance, but nothing seemed to shine bright enough to pierce the overwhelming darkness that had suddenly descended on my world. As I stepped onto the sidewalk, I found myself walking aimlessly, one step after another, the weight of the night pressing down on me. I had just left my wife. No, she wasn't my wife anymore. She was just a woman who had betrayed me, who had taken everything we had built together and shattered it into pieces. The anger, the heartbreak, the confusion, they all churned inside me like a storm. But somewhere, in the midst of it all, was something else. clarity. For the first time since this nightmare had started, I knew exactly what I had to do. I had to leave her behind. The kids were still back at the hotel, waiting for me to return, blissfully unaware of the heartbreak their father had just suffered. I had to stay strong for them. I had to protect them, because whatever happened with Lisa, whatever decisions she had made, they were still my children. They deserved better. They deserved the truth. But they also deserved peace. I dialed Lisa's number again. The phone rang, but I didn't want to hear her voice anymore. I didn't want any more lies, any more empty promises. The voicemail beeped, and I spoke the words that had been swirling in my mind. Words I had never imagined I would say. Don't bother coming home, I said, my voice steady despite the tornado of emotions inside me. You can stay with him, with David, but the kids and I are leaving. We're going home. I hit send, and for a brief moment, the phone buzzed with the 3 dots that indicated she was typing. But they stopped. Then they started again, and stopped once more. She wasn't even going to try to explain. I had already seen everything I needed to see. I closed the phone and shoved it into my pocket, feeling a strange sense of finality wash over me. I had said it. I had taken the first step toward moving on, toward building a life without her in it. And while the pain was still there, somewhere, deep inside, it was beginning to fade, replaced by something stronger, something I couldn't quite name, but that felt like strength. I had control now. The cab ride back to the hotel was quiet. Too quiet. The kids, oblivious to the storm that had just torn through their father's hearts, were asleep in the back seat. Emily curled up next to me, her small head resting against my shoulder, her breathing soft and even, and she with some Noah, still in a deep sleep, was leaning against the window, his face peaceful, despite the chaos of the night. I couldn't help but smile at them. They didn't know what had just happened. But they didn't need to. I wasn't going to burden them with this. Not yet. Not when they were still too young to understand. I had to protect them from this heartbreak, at least for now. I paid the driver and walked back into the hotel, my footsteps steady, despite the weight of everything that had just transpired. The night staff barely glanced up as I passed through the lobby, and I made my way to the elevator. Everything seemed so normal, so unchanged. The world around me was carrying on as if nothing had happened, while my life had just been ripped apart. I stood in the hallway outside our room, taking a deep breath. I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. What would I tell the kids? What would I tell them about their mother? About why she wasn't coming home with us? The thought of their innocent faces, asking questions I wasn't ready to answer, made my heart ache. But I couldn't lie to them, not anymore. I had to face this with them, even if it meant breaking their hearts. They needed the truth. They needed to know what had happened, what their mother had done, because I couldn't keep living in the shadows of lies. I opened the door to the room, and the sight of them, still asleep, still so innocent, was a painful reminder of what I had lost. They were the reason I had to keep going. They were the reason I couldn't give up. I gently woke Emily, whispering her name softly. She blinked up at me, confused. "Daddy, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep. I smiled at her, even though my heart was breaking. "We're going home. Sweetheart," I whispered. "We're going home." Emily rubbed her eyes and yawned, her little mind still trying to process the words. "What about Mommy?" she asked, her voice small and unsure. I hesitated for a moment, my mind racing. How could I explain to her? How could I make her understand? "Mom is going to stay somewhere else for a while," I said, my voice soft but firm. "She made a bad choice, Emily. But don't worry, we'll be okay." Emily nodded, her brow furrowing, as if she were trying to make sense of it. She didn't ask any more questions, and I was grateful for that. She was smart, though smarter than I realized. She would understand in her own time. But for now, I didn't need to say more. Noah stirred as I lifted him from the bed. His small body was limp, still half asleep, but I carried him to the door, his stuffed dinosaur clutched tightly in his arms. As I looked back at the room, I couldn't help but feel a sense of finality. This was it. Everything had changed. Lisa wasn't coming back, and as much as it hurt, I knew it was for the best. We left the hotel, stepping out into the chilly morning air. The sky was lightening, the first rays of dawn starting to break over the city. I hailed a cab, and as we drove to the airport, I felt the weight of the world lifting off my shoulders. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I was going to protect my kids. I was going to give them a life filled with love, truth, and safety. I wasn't going to let Lisa's betrayal destroy us. I wasn't going to let her choices define our future. When we landed back home, everything felt strangely quiet. The house, our house, was the same, but it wasn't. It could never be the same again. I carried Noah inside and set him down on the couch. Emily wandered toward the kitchen, waiting for something that would never come. Her mother, her normal morning routine. But there was no more normal. There was no going back. I picked up my phone again. There was a message from Lisa. I stared at the screen for a moment before deleting it without reading it. I didn't need to hear any more excuses. She had made her choice. The house felt emptier now. The silence was louder than ever before. I walked into the bedroom and opened the closet. Lisa's clothes were still there, hanging neatly, untouched. I stared at them for a long moment, feeling something cold settle in my chest. It wasn't anger anymore. It was just emptiness. I grabbed a suitcase and began packing her things. Her clothes, her shoes, the robe she probably wore the night she thought I wouldn't find out. It all went into the suitcase. But I didn't touch our wedding photos. They weren't hers anymore. They were mine. When I was finished, I stood by the door, waiting. I wasn't going to beg her to stay. I wasn't going to fight for something that had already been lost. I heard her car pull into the driveway, and I stood there, arms crossed, watching her walk up the steps. She stopped when she saw the suitcase, her face falling, as she realized what was happening. "You're not staying here," I said, my voice steady, unwavering. "Jason, please," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "Don't do this. You left a long time ago," I said, cutting her off. "I'm just making it official." She stood there for a moment, her lips trembling, as if she was still trying to find a way to fix this. But I didn't want her to fix it. There was nothing to fix. She nodded, picked up the suitcase, and walked inside to say goodbye to the kids. Emily asked her a few questions, but Lisa didn't look at me again. I stood in the doorway, feeling nothing but the cold finality of it all. 5 minutes later, Lisa walked out the door, and I closed it behind her. The weight of everything that had happened was still there. But for the first time, I felt free. I walked over to the couch and sat down. Emily climbed into my lap. Noah curled up beside me. They were safe. And that was all that mattered. I wasn't broken anymore. I wasn't lost. I had my family. And together, we would be okay.